Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. And I'd like to thank the Newbounds and Andrew and the people at the Pew Research Center and the INSS that have once again given me the opportunity to delve so deeply into an issue that has interested me and has and still does interest me for many years. I, of course, am not an expert on statistics, and therefore I am skipping over that previous survey, and it's very important that it was carried out, that survey, the way it was carried out, and from people from the outside and their view. And I would like to present the 4, she said contestants, but she meant participants. Rabbi David Stav, the chairman of TZOHAR organization, the rabbi of Shoham, Mrs. Dorit, Rabinyan, author, and for those who did read her last book have definitely, it's a marriage between a Jewish woman and an Arab man, and they have, I'm sure, graduated from school already, and it aroused a whole political uproar. Rabbi Israel Hofrichter, the former director of the Shahar Program for the integration of Haredim into the army, and Qadi Iyad Zahalka, the Qadi of Shari'a Court, Jerusalem. Oren complained about the fact that the Masor team are not actually sort of mentioned enough. So I would like to say that I am, in the Israeli way, I'm very close to the tradition, but on that secular side of it, so I shall hold that banner. But we live in a reality wherein there is no majority and minority, because the data, and I think I understand that you went to the tribal lecturer that is the president, and I think in 2018 there is no majority. There are tribes that are fighting amongst themselves, and I think that this reflects everyone's inner feelings and what we all sense, and it was now perhaps manifest in figures through that research. And here this could create a kind of civil strife. And will the Israelis know how to take a step over all that bloodshed and create a new order? And so the argument is not only about the framework, democracy, state, religion, but in this mosaic, each person wants to trample on the other part in that mosaic. And the question is, will people be able to overcome it? So are we talking about 2 people, 2-state solution? In other words, now there is a state for the religious, for the liberals. You could perhaps say this is, but that there's more shared between the secular Arabs and Jews without the conflict than there is on the other side. So in other words, 2 nations for 2 peoples, without thinking of the whole narrative that connects between 2 peoples here. So I was wondering if we could reach some kind of understanding of where is this all going. But Dorit, I will start with you, since it's the International Women's Day, and also because I think we ought to start with ladies first. In some way, in your book, in that living, I think it was called The Living Wire, you did something, it was called Border Life. Did you know that this was really explosive material? Well, I wrote it a number of years ago, but I didn't know to what degree I have been sort of really touching upon and rolling in something that Israel is truly experiencing. I think by the time I had finished writing the book, things had changed greatly. I didn't think that I was neutralizing some kind of detonator. But there's an amazing finding in your book, and it came up here, that in Israel the thought of marriage outside your group that you belong to is an enormous taboo. No, I didn't go into that kind. I just wrote a love story, or perhaps not. I simply described perhaps an entire process of resistance to the love between 2 protagonists. because they were carrying they had crossed 2 oceans, and her encounter with this charming intellectual from Ramallah, because they couldn't meet in the Middle East, so that they had to cross oceans in order to meet together, despite they considered themselves as universal liberal entities by themselves. They still are a mold, a template of the landscape of where they were born, and they were as if molded and consolidated around the conflict. Even if they haven't taken sides in it, it is still within them, an integral part of them. So I wanted to ask you and Rabbi Stav, if you went over the data and the research study, what is the finding that really stood out the most, the graph that you said, this is something that truly troubles me? Good evening. I think that were quite a few data that really interested me, and I'd like to touch upon one that perhaps points at the rift that I was aware of and I was familiar with, but not with that kind of strength to it and embedded in it. I think as an Israeli, what frightens you more? Would it frighten you more if your daughter or son married someone who is non-Jewish, or a Haredi? They were all Israelis. No, but all in the survey. The Jews were asked. You said Israeli, and please, I'd like, the Arabs are also Israelis. We're only talking about Jews at the moment, right? So what worried you more, that your daughter or son may marry someone who is non-Jewish or someone who is Haredi? And the answer of the majority of the secular Jews, perhaps of the Masortis too, I don't remember, what the majority was, that it worries them more that they might marry a Haredi. And don't forget, I'm not exactly from the Haredi world, but it worried them more than that they would marry a non-Jew, which means that, yes, there are 4 tribes that are here, but the hostility and this kind of block between the various groups is so deeply embedded and so frightening, and so many of the members of that tribe, if God forbid they should feel that there's a supremacy to the other part of another tribe, they will simply abandon ship and move to other haunts. Rabbi Hofrichter, this Rabbi Stav said that finding found there, I'm now paraphrasing, if it's okay, I'm recapping, to that rift and the hostility between, what was the finding that troubled you? I think that anything that speaks about hostility, hatred, can lead to even active steps. More active is usually something that worries me in general terms. I feel that I or my entire environment cannot function in that kind of atmosphere and environment. And therefore I empathize totally and identified with what Professor de Pergola said, that you've got to catch the train before it runs off in the wrong direction. And I think that the research studies were perhaps less politically correct. I mean, when they asked about the transfer, I mean, I would have asked if there was someone who is hurt in a car accident or actually in even a terror attack, but he is from the other camp. It could be even from the 4 tribes that we talk about, the 4 camps. What do you feel? That kind of question would perhaps show, I mean, that we spoke about lack of responsibility, that would have really lit the red light. No, but apropos, the expulsion, you saw that the majority, I mean, there was an argument about how it should have been formulated or worded, and I'm sure there will be a whole discussion of that. But Rabbi Stav and the other rabbi, when you see a majority who supports the expulsion is a religious, and the religious and right-wingers, were you surprised by it? I wasn't surprised, but I am very troubled by it. Rabbi Stav? I identify with my colleague's friend, but it really does depend on how that question is asked and exactly after which terror attack was it asked. No, I'd just like to say I'm allowing myself to sort of break in for a moment And please don't be polite. I will control it, but please feel free to jump in at any point. No, but the question was asked in that same state, in the same country. So in other words, the religious and the secular, they all had suffered that same terror attack. But those, I mean, the liberal, secular, let's say, or democratic sanctifiers of democratic values, they said no, and the religious said yes. It's not as if a tribe who lives outside of Israel said something and the tribe that lives in Israel said something else. Am I right? No, but it's not correct in reality. No, I just wanted to ensure that the survey was carried out at the same time to everyone in all the sectors. Yes. Okay. Dana, forgive me for saying it. And I know that I am actually taking a risk here. But I know, with all due respect, the number of stabbing attacks and other attacks that took place in the center of Israel as compared to the number in Gush Etzion, wherein there is one every week. When was a research taken? When was a research carried out? The research study, Alan. Pre-V, immediately after protective edge campaign, but before everything that's been happening. So you think after all the southern localities in the periphery and after dozens of people who were impacted, it was asked. So in other words, you identify with it, but you are not surprised. And Professor Stav, he said he's not actually surprised, but I'm definitely troubled and perhaps even ashamed of it, yes. So, Qadi, I would just like to speak about what was discussed beforehand. I think that a terror attack, however condemned it ought to be and how terrible it is not actually, it is. You cannot generalize about the Arab population in Israel. You can never do that, because not forget that this is a conflict that we are all embedded in. So this issue of the Arabs in Israel ought to be center of the consensus here. And it's not an issue of left-wingers or right-wingers or a partisan issue, either religious parties or others. This is an issue like people care. Just as you care about Yerucham and Dimona, you have to care about all the Arab towns and localities as well, al-Fahim and all the others, because the Arab citizens are part of the citizens of the State of Israel, and that what will make us feel well, our well-being, that we will all feel secure and confident, and it will contribute to the fostering, the nurturing of all the citizens of the State of Israel. So let us all. So, of course, if there is a terror attack, I will condemn it, and Rabbi Hofrichter will condemn it, and the same Rabbi Stav and Dana. Sorry, but when the heads of the Arab leadership actually support Hezbollah, then you cannot expect the Jewish population, yes, they all love them. But listen for a moment. Believe me, I'm enjoying myself. Let me work. It's fine. Don't worry. Let them. I just like to complete. And we're going to create ground meals. Please, would you complete your sentence? Please, if you don't mind, just one. Wait 3 seconds so that he can at least complete his sentence. But you gave me permission to jump in. So, no, I condemn. It has to be incumbent upon all of us to work harder so that we will live a shared, partnered life with mutual dignity. But if you're talking about Hezbollah, they are a terror organization that actually perpetrates acts against civilians, and I condemn their acts. Okay, but I don't want to talk about Hezbollah, but the one finding that I really was grabbed by was the ground rules, that 98% of the secular population believe that when there is a sort of argument or a quarrel between the democratic and the Jewish state, they immediately say the democratic, and a mirror picture in the Haredi religious side. In other words, they prefer the halachic side, the Jewish side, which means there is no capability to have a shared framework because they don't agree on the ground rules. Do you agree with me about that? Yes, I think twice a day I move from one side of that kind of hyphen in the middle between the two. Every day of my life, it's part of our daily essence. We keep moving in this kind of sort of this kind of Western movie that we're in. We're the goodies in the morning, we're the baddies in the afternoon, and things switch every time there's some kind of transgression or conflict on one side. So this kind of the supremacy of the democracy or the supremacy of the Jewishness of the state, it's something that moves the whole time, fluctuates. So it really does stress the greater importance in a specific sector for the democratic character, and in another sector they believe in the Jewish sector. I mean, authors work with high resolution fine tuning, and these are big statements here. But this is the law we live by and what we believe in this part of the world.
What about the political clout? This data of the political clout, which says that Israeli society and its political structure, to date, the religious groups have more power politically than the others. How is this reflected in this? You found the wrong person to ask this question, but you're here. But I would like to connect to what the gentleman said. Karl Marx said once that the impact on ideologies and ideas, religious and non-religious, on the society are zero, null. I think this survey shows that shows exactly the opposite. But I do think that ideologies and ideas they are the spiritual identity card of every person, but in practice, what happens is that they cause hostility, rifts, and make life almost intolerable. But as opposed to that, what Iyad said, I think that practical needs, the Gemara says it, and our scholars, that any worldview, including Jewish worldview, is bad, except for that of God, because God has mercy, but people don't. Today, the idea is, it's something that you say twice in 7 years, when you finish paying all the debts and contributions, when you take care of the other, from a practical point of view, this is a worldview you can live with. But I want to take you back to a more significant question, because if we go back to this practical issue, and I agree with you, the question is what are the rules of the game? And this data that you can read, when it will have to be a choice between this and the other, then entire population will say Jewish is better than democracy, or do you think that it's going to change with time? Because eventually the Haredi population knows that I don't think you have to change anything. Where is it today? I think you have to find the structure, the solution, political, social, that enables every population to live according to its own faith, its rules, and you can find it. There are examples all over the world that enable all sorts of populations. Yes, but that's on condition that you maintain democracy. But I want to understand this. Do you relate differently to this data? 89% of the Haredi said, if I have to choose, we go to a halachic state. And the others say that they would prefer the Arabs according to the Shari'a law. I think we have to create a situation that the Arabs will live according to that, and the Jews will live. I don't think it's a problem to find these models. I think it's a question of terminology. When you say Jew and democracy, what do you mean? When you ask a religious person, what do you prefer, a democratic Jew? He hears what's going to be if the majority in the Knesset will decide that you cannot lay tefillin. So I'm saying that the answer is not 89, but 100% of the religious people because of the tefillin. The same for secular. And again, I appreciate the words. If you ask a secular man and you'll say, there'll be a democratic decision that will say that you must hit Arabs or hurt poor people. That will be the majority of the Knesset. Are you going to support it? This is what he hears in the music. When you talk about a democratic Jew, in national terms, it's a completely different story, because when you say Jew and democratic in the Knesset, that's a different discourse. Do I want the state and its laws will be more according to Jewish law or more according to liberal general norms? And then the discourse is much more moderate and much more balanced. I believe that the gaps are smaller. The religious want democracy and the secular want Judaism. It's more complex than these say that and these say we want the other. It's much closer than what it looks like. What does it look like from your point of view? I think that advanced state, people who live in a normal state, there are limits of the public discourse, like to make racist remarks, or to make racist laws, or to blame an entire population in deeds that most of the population condemns, or to erase a whole population from its presence, like the bill that was to do away with the Arabic as an official language. I think such things, the limit of democracy, whether it's a Jewish democratic state or a Hispanic democratic state or Afro-American democratic state, any advanced country couldn't afford to have its leaders, its representatives to express themselves or to do things that jeopardize the civil rights. I want to tell you that we in Israel, we have a severe problem that we talk about. We do not try to create a joint civil theater, neither between Jews and Arabs, or Muslims and Christians, or secular and religious. Everybody wants to own the civil scope and to throw away the others. When it's the Haredi, is a different, or Arab or whatever. I think that this survey, I think it has a lot of positive aspects regarding the Arab population. And I wrote it in my thesis that I did between 2009 and 13 in the Hebrew University. It validates what I say. The Arab population, all of it, Muslims, Druze, and Christians, all of them, they show openness to the Jewish majority. They accept the Jewish majority. They're ready to live side by side and work with it. Ready and ready and ready. But parallel to that, there's an opposite direction of the Israeli society that wants less contact with the Arab population and doesn't want to live side by side. And that's why the civil theater is now narrowing, and people take ownership about it, on it. There's sovereignty. When you researched into these populations, when you approach them and you ask them what is their readiness to approach Jews, what about sovereignty? Was that an issue? The fact that this is a state which was established, founded according to values of the Jewish sovereignty. I think that the state determined its identity, its definition, its determination. And this have to do with the Scroll of Independence and the basic laws. But this doesn't prevent anybody, whether he be Arab or Haredi, to come and to dream and to offer an alternative, as long as the majority in the state thinks. If Israel wants to call itself today the democratic, socialistic Jewish state, who's going to determine that? Only the citizens. If the minority wants a socialist state, does he jeopardize the values of the state? We don't want people to come and talk against the existence of the state or to harm it, but we want to create a safe scope of freedom of thought, freedom of suggestion. I think you're touching upon a point that says that timing is everything, and you're describing a process of development and the wish to integrate of the Arab population. And the survey maybe shows, unfortunately, there's a Jewish majority that says we don't want that anymore. When we wanted it, it didn't work out, and maybe the great tragedy of this entire region. But I want to ask Rabbi Hofrichter, look, just one sentence. I say openness doesn't mean assimilation. Yes, the fact that we are open to one another, work together, live in mixed neighborhoods, we study in university and we do things together, doesn't mean I have to lose my Muslim Arab identity, or I don't have to marry a Jewish woman, or the Muslim has to marry a Christian. That you can maintain your difference, and difference is good. Versatility is good, it's positive, but to enable joint civil life. So, Rabbi, because another amazing data from the survey is the fact that we live separately. We don't have every tribe, except for the middle ones, like the Arabs and the Masorti and religious, that they're not definite. But the Haredi tribe, and I'll say also the secular tribe, take the isolation as a principle. They don't want you to come to us, we don't want you to come to them. But such isolation, is that relevant to a state which is democratic and advanced, modern? Is this a work plan or is it a problem? I think you can live in separate neighborhoods, separate cities. It doesn't take away from the fact that you can create, as the Qadi says, to find maybe the civil joint area. I think you have to make a decision between the practical needs of people. They have to make a living. They have to live in physical safety, not necessarily national one, not ideology. And the ideologies, which are very important, to keep them, again, in the protected area of things that have to do with education, even law and order. There's a way to do these things, but you have to enable the various populations, each of them to live its own life without feeling threatened. You know, this feeling of threat, we talked about violation, about violence. You know, unless you're very hungry, what makes you feel some sort of aggression about in the animal world is only when they're very hungry. Same for people, especially when we talk about the personal identity of individual or community. When you feel threatened, not necessarily because of aggressive threats, even if you feel that your identity, your community identity is beginning to dismantle, that causes reactions and aggression. And I think we do have to maintain the fact that people want to live in the same environment, the same society. I don't see any problem with that. Rabbi Stav, do you agree that this isolation, this separation into tribes, everybody lives in his own neighborhood, except for making a living, do you think it adds to the state of Israel? No. I think it's a recipe for the destruction of a society. And unfortunately, reality shows us that many in the Haredi population, or all of it, also in the national religious population, they prefer the separate neighborhoods, whether it's be in the settlements or even in the center of the country. And some of the general public also, they prefer neighborhoods that are isolated. I think it's a problem with Ahavat Israel, love of Israel. You cannot love me from afar unless you see me as a neighbor that you can be helped by. I can be helped by you if I need to fix a tire. in my car or to ask for a jug of milk. If you don't see me, I said, don't tell me stories that you love me. You don't love me. Maybe you want to take advantage of me. You don't love me. To love somebody, to live together, to live close by, that takes, you have to tackle problems together. Is that true out of the Jewish religion? You want to encourage mixed city to all the citizens of Israel? I think I have no problem with that. I have a son and a daughter who lives now in Lod, which is a mixed city, and a son who is in the paratroopers, and he lives in a Jewish Arab neighborhood. I understand that gaps or the oppositions can create maybe obstacles that will ignite hatred. But I think that there's a national wagon here, and you have to carry it. You cannot just talk about making a living or social gaps. You have to help the needy. Okay, that's important. But in these tribes, that with the help of God, there'll be two, the Haredi and the Arab tribes of the Israeli society, 50%. We are 39%. That most of them, to date, are not ready to go to the army. Many of them will not also add to the economy of Israel. This, I think, is terrible, awful. I don't know how we can advance from there. And I think that this is the time. This is time to create a real discourse within these society that will all understand that unless we pull up our sleeves and enable everybody and encourage everybody to go into the labor market in order to go to do civil service or military service. Half of the society cannot live without actually doing it. By the way, I have to say that the data about the employment of Haredi men and Haredi women have changed dramatically, and I think we have to say for historical justice that if you look why Arab women don't work, why do bus lines go through the villages? And if we want to know why the Haredi men, they cannot work in a mixed society. It's not that them. The establishment also has a part in it. But Dorit, with your permission, Dorit.
Vis-a-vis this national service, Dorit, I would like to ask you, I don't think it's a secret that the secular tribe is, apropos, I mean, there's data that really confirm what we feel in the atmosphere, and there is that kind of sense that people say, I'm not sure I'm going to stay here, I'm not sure if I have a future here. So, and I am going to look for an alternative somewhere else. There are those who say this is a wonderful enterprise or endeavor and it didn't work. I can't talk on on behalf of people who've given up, and because I didn't, I can only pull their shirts and say, please, please, please don't go, because you are our strength. There's also a demographic aspect, isn't there? We've also got to think in demographic terms. That we should not find ourselves, justifiably called a minority. We might become one. So I think that when the Ministry of Education did not accept and they prohibited the actual the learning of my book, Border Life, it was by... There were others who said, you are confusing our audience, people who do not love Israel so much. Right-wing Minister of Education said that you cannot teach that. On the other hand, you said you are a committed Zionist. You are blowing hot and cold, an enthusiastic Zionist. So through them, I understood. That is perhaps our biggest mistake, our biggest that we allowed the Zionism to infiltrate slowly underneath the one's kepele. In other words, how does one explain to those representatives of the world media that Zionism is still for us, part of us, no less than for a politician whose career comes and goes? We are here, we're staying here, we're identified with it. The multiplicity of our identities does not diminish from our empathy and our identity and commitment to Zionism and our acts that we take for the sake of Zionism. The fact that we can actually sort of all the complex aspects of that and not just sort of do dichotomous black and white slogans, for example. It's very difficult to explain that. There is no just black and white from the point of view of the story of the Arab and the Jew. Had it been just a dichotomous story, then it would be like, it would, then of course we would not want to remain here because it would have been morning this and afternoon that. Now, when they related to as if it's a monolithic block in the Arab population, but your gut feeling, the Muslim, I'm not talking about the Christian group, had you need to segment the religious and the moderate Arabs, Muslim Arabs, how would you say it? I think that our public is very different from the point of view of its religiosity, because I think that the vast majority of the Muslims in Israel identify with the Islam because they are a minority in a country wherein they feel that they are suffering from internal problems, and therefore there is a kind of cohesion around their identity values, which is their Muslim character. And again, because our society has preserved values that has remained for many generations, and therefore that tradition that we have remained will always go along and tally with religion. This issue of religion is not always an extreme one. It is a humane one with humane values, but there are various rather extremist interpretations that extricate it from its truth. So therefore, when we say that the vast majority of the Muslims in Israel are committed to their religion, they pray 5 times a day, and even more so when they come to pray on a Friday. But that doesn't mean that their religiosity is higher, but simply, and they belong more to the Islam movement. It's not necessarily something that goes together. You can be a religious person, but you can also believe in democratic values and civic equality and work and productivity, and you can be religious in different ways with different concepts of it. So therefore this issue of religion does not mean that you are politically polarized or extremist. I believe that should Israel recognize the fact that it is a multicultural country with pluralist values, allowing each group to conduct according to its faith and according to its values and concept, but through dignity and respect of each and every one of those groups. I think the abolishing a group because of its national belonging or religious belonging or will not contribute to stability, security, or the decrease of tension in society. And the recognition of this diversity, of the differences between and what could be a shared common denominator, is a country where all its citizens would enjoy living in. But I would also like to add that had this state enabled the economic promotion and advancement of Israeli society, the GNP in Israel would have increased by at least 8%. I mean, can you imagine if we had that kind of quantum leap of 8%? Wow, what would have happened here? Can I ask about the inspirations and fantasy? I think that this this kind of unspoken, unofficial desire and whim of half of the Jews in Israel, that their fantasy is to expel or transfer all the Jews. That is something that I keep sort of hearing reverberating. But exactly, we keep as if, in the survey, we know our everyday life that there's a sense of siege that makes each group insulate itself within their own group even more. Rabbi Stav mentioned that before, and Rabbi Hofrichter. One of the journalists said that I'd come back from a holiday in the north, and I said, wow, I didn't succeed in finding a non-kosher restaurant. And he said to me, Baruch Hashem, at long last. Well, is it at long last? Is that where it's going? Is from your worldview? Is that how you see things? Is that what it's becoming? Baruch Hashem, he said basically. Thank God there is no longer a non-kosher restaurant. No, but I don't eat in restaurants, so I can't actually testify to that. No, but despite that, please. I mean, it's the same with the public transport and the other most daily routine components of our daily lives. We're talking about in a very clear-cut framework wherein from the point of view of their ideology, will not feel intimidated or threatened, but on the other hand, feel as if they are at home and do as they wish without any overpowering or sort of taking over aspirations. But in other words, when we're talking about separate spaces, then obviously in Bnei Brak and Ramat Shemesh there won't be buses on Shabbat. Bet Shemesh or Ramat Bet Shemesh, you've got both. Oh, come on, don't go into the nitty-gritty. No, but it's a first-class example of a town that has. But let me finish my question. In that kind of separate space that is called the state of Tel Aviv, North Tel Aviv, if you're talking about your whole worldview of separate lives, could we have public transport on a Shabbat? You said yes in the audience, but I'm asking you on the podium, at the podium. No. Look, these aspirations, every ideology, every worldview has that part of the way they see the world now and how they see it in the future. But despite all that, or moreover, I mean, Judaism also has a kind of ideology and sort of restrains it to a certain degree. I don't know that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the first Haredi, and he believed that you should totally dedicate yourself to the studying of Torah without even thinking about earning a living. But when he left his cave after 12 years, all he saw around him was Jew working the land with a harvester. And it's a kind of allegory. I don't know how exactly to explain it. And then someone came out and said, look, if you want to do that, then you have to go back to the cave if you don't want this to be happening. And he called it a kind of hell in the cave. So later on, when he did come out, he said, okay, it's enough that there should be only a few people like me, because he understood that the world couldn't run exactly according to his ideology. But it's a pragmatic sort of worldview, but it's also a kind of vision to a degree as well. No, it's an interesting and very sincere answer and very fascinating, even has an optimistic vision sort of embedded in it. But I'm a very extremist person. I perceive a religion in a very strong way, but I want people to enable me to do things in the way I understand them. But I also understand, as can Dorit also do things as she wanted? Well, Rabbi Stav feels uncomfortable, but there is something called guarantee, or arvut, as they say in Hebrew. In other words, this Jewish guarantee one for the other. I think it was Chazon Ish who once said that we cannot do everything in order to impose or coerce things so that things will happen the way we want them to do. There are things that we have to do, that we ought to do as well. But the question is, when you say that you don't want to overtake and be imperialist, but the question is, when you have that electoral clout that can trample us in our rights and what we want, will you then have those internal breaks and stop yourselves doing it as a community? So, for example, will someone actually curb those imperialistic aspirations? Will you have that responsibility to do not allow that, so that we will not live in a halachic state? I'm asking you as leaders. Okay, we talk about liberals and democrats, then we ensure that you would have your needs, and we ensure that you would have your privileges and your rights and everything that you wanted. Will you do the same for us? I feel that there's a gap between the discourse around the table and what is happening 70 kilometers away from here in Israeli politics and at the Knesset. It's as if we weren't here for the last year. The real question, Dorit, that you're asking is, the parties that are in the coalition, will each one try and control the public space? Of course they will. They're already doing it now. They're already taking over the public space, and you're asking whether it's going to happen in the future. Of course it will happen in the future as well. Rabbi Hofrichter said he is pro people in Tel Aviv doing whatever they want to do in Tel Aviv, which is pretty irregular. No, I believe that all the rabbis would say the same, all the things. No, I just want to add something. My parents came for Iran. We were immigrants from Iran. If, God forbid, I see those who go all around the world just so that they won't have to be stuck here in Israel. If I one day will have to be in an exile away from here and find myself incarcerated in some kind of either exile, like like Iran was, or others, and perhaps we are surrounded by all sorts of signs and anxiety here in Israel, and we seem to ignore them, and I'm frightened that will I actually find myself in some kind of sort of Shari'a law state somewhere else. No, the people that they want people will want to expel are not your friends, Dorit, but rather my friends, said the rabbi. Okay, but with your permission, I'd like to conclude with another sentence. I would like to protest here to this intimidating discourse that Rabbi David Stav and Dorit Rabinyan are here bringing. I think that it is a non-beneficial discourse. I think if you want to separate everyone from the Arabs and from the others, that is a discourse that I am not willing to accept. I perhaps have heard a great deal about Rabbi Stav, and I have always appreciated his enlightened words, but I'm stunned to hear his words about this kind of these threats and intimidations. And Dorit Rabinyan, I've heard a lot about your book, but to come and present this kind of petrifying discourse here, be frightened, that's no, but there's a reality. Look at it in your eyes. Look at it. I'm not willing to accept any interpellations from the audience. You will not shout at me from the audience. If you don't want to, please get up and go. I was just talking about a reality. We live in reality. We do not live in all sorts of ideas and visions for the future. We live in a reality wherein 21% of the citizens of the State of Israel are Arabs, and that is reality. And to come and say to that 21% and ask them to declare loyalty and allegiance morning, night, and day. So I would like to say to you, Rabbi Stav, leave this kind of frightening, sort of intimidating discourse. Talk to us as citizens. Talk to us about the issues that worry us as citizens, and work together in order to try and help each group in the population to accept the other, because the Jews are not going to go to sleep at night and get up in the morning and find out that there are no Arabs, and the same vice versa. So let us learn to live together. I would just like to say that your summarizing sentence was an optimistic sentence. I felt that tone of optimism. Now, could I have a concluding sentence? I'm not sure who mentioned it, but the fact that the Jewish American public looks at the Jewish Israeli public and does not understand that they are two totally different entities. So most specifically, when you stubbornly do not want to accept the reforms and the conservatives, you are losing the Jews of the world. Don't you fear that? Not only the rifts here, but you're also losing the American Jewry as well. I'd just like to say one sentence to the Qadi. We are not intimidated. We're not trying to frighten things. We're trying to grapple with reality. And I sincerely hope that we will together, we'll be able to create the frameworks that we live in, and to know what the limits are of each of those groups, and we will live together. But we are not threatened, but we also do not live in a disconnected world. We have to grapple with reality and contend with it. All I said is that every single group, especially even the power groups that are now in the regime, have to not exploit that power, because that will be the last straw on the camel's back to the secular population, and also the Arab population as well. So therefore, I think your question was of paramount importance. This story about the reform and the conservative movements actually should move on two axes. The question about how weddings ought to take place in Israel is an internal discourse of the Jewish population that ought to be run by the Jewish population, and there's a legitimacy to discuss it with, of course, the reform movement, and there's nothing sacred that cannot be discussed. But the kind of belligerent discourse that really poo-poos and denigrates other people, casting aspersions against other groups, that is unacceptable. You can argue, you can quarrel, but you should never poo-poo and denigrate other people.
Dorit, when you look ahead, had you received the keys now, what would you do? Oy vey, said she. I would give it back to you. I would say, Dana, you do it better than I do. I really hope for the better. I'm not in a position in public. I'm a private person. My writing is intimate. I want to reflect from my point of view as an observer what I see. Rabbi Hofrichter, is it the weather? That's it? Nothing you can do about it? It's a storm, he says. Well, it's exactly what I wanted to say. I think that the main question here, we see the survey, we feel the situation. The question is, what do we do about it? It was mentioned about the Jewish renewal among the secular population. I want to talk about the opposite. In the Jewish world, there are great changes as well. They happen. They happen under the surface, above the surface. There's a wish to integrate in the economic activities of this country and also security. I managed 5 years the Shahar Program of the Haredi soldiers. A lot of issues, conflicting issues that we tackled. But one thing, this issue of recruiting Haredi to the army, there are all sorts of rules. They have to not be married. We call it separation and not exclusion. The army has the ideology of Alice Miller, of equality. How do these things go together? We have here a colonel in reserves, Hagit Eshef. She was the leader of this Shahar for the religious Haredi soldiers with a lot of sensitivity and wisdom. Don't suspect she doesn't feel this issue of the gender equality, but she did it in such a way that when things became a conflict, since the need, the physical need, is stronger, than ideologies, you can find a way for compromise. Where there's a will, there's a way, and I really want to thank you all, and I want to take this opportunity to mention President Rivlin. You saw him today. He is leading a fascinating process. He established steering committee. I'm a part of it, and we're looking with all the tribes for a new Israeli order, so that in the next summer we are going on a long voyage. It's not simple. Eventually it's going to touch upon this need to live together. And I would dare say, in the spirit of the Women's International Day, I hope the rabbis don't kill me, I think God does exist in the small details. So thank you very much. Somebody said God in masculine, but I say God in feminine also, says she.